Hi guys, this is Risa and I'm starting my first live feed tutorial. I hope that it is helpful. I hope that it inspires you guys to try dotting if you haven't already, and for those of you who have and have some questions, I'm hoping I'll be able to answer them. I'm still learning as I go with this as well, just like all of you. So it's, for me, a very relaxing way to paint. I was drawn to doing dotting mostly because I'm not a very great artist in terms of doing characters and things like that. As much as I would love to be able to do those as well as some of you, I find it to be harder. And I find dotting to actually be very relaxing for me. I kind of zone out on it. And you can just let your imagination run wild more than you would expect to. Sometimes I think people look at mandalas and other dotting things and think that it might be limiting, but I find that it's not. I find that I can create things like the bee that some of you have really liked. Flowers that are different and unique with dotting. I like doing those. The sunflower, I know a lot of you really liked, and this was also one of my favorites. Not a mandala, but dotting. I mean, that's a whole different art into itself that's really fun. And then you can just get creative, just doing shapes with dotting as well. Let me see if I can. I'm going to have a hard time reading your comments because of the way I have the phone situated. So I'll do my best, but I don't know that I'll be able to. I'll have to go like this, and that's going to be kind of hard. So sorry if I don't answer your questions as the live feed is going on, but I will definitely go back, rewatch it, and answer all the questions that I can. So feel free to post and comment with your questions, but understand that I'm not reading them as I go because of the way the camera is situated. So I thought I would do this one. And the reason I wanted to do this one is because it incorporates some techniques that you can apply to many mandalas, many different designs and patterns or what have you. And you can apply the same dotting technique to other stones as well, such as the flowers and things like that, because a lot of it is about the spacing and getting used to how much paint to load on your dotting tool, whatever that might be, and how to space them, trying to not let them run into each other. That's still a challenge for me, and that's why I keep certain cleanup things on hand. I'll start by showing you the cleanup things I keep on hand, as well as the tools that I keep on hand. The tools, I mentioned some of when I did the preview video the other day. So tools, you can use anything you have around the house. You can use toothpicks, you can use Q-tips. I happen to have, when I started doing this, these nail art dotting tools, because I do like nail art. These are wonderful. I still go back to using those even though I have bought other dotting tools that I like. I still seem to gravitate to these. They seem to give the most uniform dot. They seem to be easier to judge how much paint to load on the tips. So I enjoy these. You can use nail heads. You can use straightened out bobby pins. You can use all sorts of things. I know some of you have bought some dotting tools that you use. I, as well, bought these, the ones with the big balls. And I thought, wow, these are going to be great. Well, for me, and I'm sure it depends on the individual, but for me, when I was using these, I found them really difficult to load with the paint. I found that I ended up having to kind of roll onto my rock to get a nice perfect circle. And that just it wasn't working for me. If these work for you, fantastic. Use whatever works for you. Another thing that I have discovered through comments from somewhere, I don't know if it was YouTube videos or another site or dot, I don't know, but it was to get these from Home Depot, and they're punches, various sizes, and let me see if I can get this angled right. You can see all the different sizes here, and they're just wonderful. I really enjoy using these. So those are my tools that I use. Cleanup wise, I always like to have toothpicks on hand. If I tend to get any dotting that looks like it's bleeding into the other, it's very helpful with either a toothpick to kind of get in between and clean off that paint. It's also helpful to have these pointed tip Q-tips. And what I do with these is I take a damp rag and I just dampen the tip in there, get it as pointed as I can possibly get it by twisting it in my fingers. It's just barely damp, and then that often helps me to scoop up, and I kind of do it in a swirling motion, like moving. I don't know if you can see, I kind of do that with the toothpick in my fingers and just kind of scoop the paint off a little bit. And if you take off the whole dot that caused the merge, that's fine. Just let it dry and then redot. So it's really, don't let that intimidate you as much as it intimidated me when I first started doing it. As far as cleanup goes, that's what I use. A lot of you were asking about what paint I use. I don't use any special paint for dotting. I literally use what most of you guys already know about, which is Walmart paints, such as Apple Barrel. Any of the acrylic paints, whatever's on sale really, that's what I get. Some of them have a tendency to be a little too thin. So if I do run into that, I use a tiny bit of this to thicken it up. I just got this on Amazon, and it takes so little to thicken up a small pot of acrylic paint. This is, this is one of my newer jars. But anyway, I was going to show you. It's very thick. You just take a little scoop out. You can take a little scoop out of it with your Q-tip, put it into your acrylic paint, and just stir it up. That's it. It's really simple, and it gets it that right consistency. I tend to like having the little bump that the dotting can create. It gives a texture to me that it's therapeutic to paint, but it also is therapeutic to feel it. So I like that little bump. I think that's part of what gives mandalas and dot art character. Some people don't like the bump. They like a flatter dot to be made. A thinner paint is good for that, but then you have your cons with that too, because with a thinner paint, you have the risk of, like with this one, for example, I wasn't thoroughly happy with this because I didn't thicken this pink when I did my top dots. And as you can see, when it dried, it showed the lavender through. I don't like that. I wish that paint I had taken the time to thicken before I did my top dots. Personal preference. I like the idea of one time and I'm done with it. If my paint is too thin, I tend to feel like I need to go back over it. And to go back over a dot is not easy because you have to have it lined up perfectly with where the other one was, the exact same amount of paint loaded on your dotting tool. It's just too much for me. I don't like dealing with that. So anyway, that's why this one didn't get corrected, because I didn't want to go back over it. The other nice thing about the dot having that little peak is when you do your top dot, that peak is even better. It looks prettier. Then again, you have the benefit of the thinner paint, because when you have that on your underneath, you can do your top dots without it having a little bump. But as you get used to it, that bump isn't going to stop you. It really, I think you'll like it. But like I said, personal preference, do what you like. Use the thinner paint, use the thicker paint. I tend to like just a smidge thicker, not super thick, but a smidge thicker, kind of the consistency of a thin Elmer's glue, if that makes sense. That's what gives that little peak nicely. So I was talking about the paints that I use. That is the paint that I do use the most. I did buy some Arteza color shift paints. I like those. They do tend to be thicker. So you can either thin those with water or another medium, or you can just be very careful with them and use them mostly for top dots. That's what I've tended to do. I also keep on hand for fixes one of my black Posca pens. That comes in handy when I'm doing mandalas on a chalkboard base coated paint, which is what this is an example of. If I have a mess up, it's really nice. After the paint has dried, after the dots have dried, you can just go in and correct it with your black Posca. I find that dotting on darker backgrounds really makes it pop. But if I'm doing something like the sunflower on the Santorini, it doesn't really matter what color my background is because my dots are all so close together that you don't really see a lot of the background. On this one, because I wanted the center of the sunflower to be dark, I traced a circle. I don't remember what I used to trace it, but anything that works. I think it might have been this. No, it wasn't this. But anything you find that's a circle, I traced the circle, the size that I wanted, and I colored that in with a Posca pen first before doing those center dots. That gave me the best of both worlds. I had the beautiful white Santorini barely showing through on the petals, but then I had the dark for that center. So you can just kind of be creative with it. Visualize before you start what you want as your background. That will help you determine if you're going to dot on different kinds of surfaces, whether it's the Santorini, which has its own benefits, whether it's the chalk spray paint, or whether it's a natural sealed, in this case resin, stone. Lots of benefits to either of any of them. The choice is yours. Cleanup is a little bit tougher on the Santorini unless you do a clear coat on it. So if you're just starting out, I would recommend either doing the chalkboard paint, the chalk paint, or the resined or sealed natural rock. Graduate up to this because mistakes are much harder to take care of on that. Just FYI. Okay, so as I said, this rock has, this mandala has a lot of the techniques that I think everybody needs to have in their arsenal for dotting. Almost all mandalas start with a center dot. You can see. They all do. Not almost all. They all do. All have a center dot. It's up to you what size you want to use. In this case, it was a larger size. When you are going to do your top dots, which is at the end of doing all the rest because you want it fully dried, here's why you want it fully dried. There was a dot in the center there. As you can see, I hope, it's now natural rock showing through. That was a happy accident. I had my center dot. I did not wait for it to fully dry before I went to do a top dot on it. When I did the top dot on it, it started to lift up the paint of the bottom dot because it wasn't dry. I took this toothpick and I tried to scoop it off, but it was scooping off the bottom dot too. Well, because it was on a resined rock, the whole thing came off really nice and clean, and it actually gave an effect that I liked. Actually no dot in the center, but the space where there was a dot. So I kind of like that idea. That's something you can think about. I don't know if I could ever achieve that again. Like I said, it was an accident. But anyway, start with your center dot. I'm going to demonstrate on this one, and I will do the center dot. But as you can see, after the center dot, you kind of imagine a clock. And then you start with your dots, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and so on. And you turn it, and you do it the other way. I will show that, and I thought it would be easier for me to show that first on a piece of paper, because I can also show you how much paint to load. And I hope it's showing clearly in this video. So I will show you, this is just black paint that I'm using right here. This is one of my transfer punch set tools. When you load, you want to load generously, but not so much that it's literally dripping off. Can you see that? There's enough to give a full dot, but not so much that it's going to drip before I get to the rock. When I'm holding my dotting tool, I'm holding it like a pencil, but I'm holding it up and down. I'm kind of supporting myself to keep from getting shaky with my pinky. So I'm holding it like that, go straight down. You want to think of the paint touching the surface of the rock, but not the tool. Push down enough, keeping it straight, and then pull straight up. That gives you your full circle right there. Damp rag, wipe that off. That's done. Okay? Then, what I meant by the 12 o'clock, this is the size dotting tool I'm going to use right now. What I meant by the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock, just imagine that center dot being a clock. You're going to do the same thing, balancing yourself to keep it from shaking. At your 12 o'clock, space it out, straight down. Right there, there's your 12 o'clock. When I'm loading this kind of tool, that's about the amount of paint that I want on it. Okay, now I'm going to my 6 o'clock, and I'm coming right back down. I like these little turntables. So that way, I can envision it being 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock again. Loading my tool. There you go. Right back down. 12 o'clock, lift straight up. If you lift to the side, or if you hold it to the side, you'll have a tendency to have an oblong dot or to trail the paint off of the dot. So you want to make sure you're holding it up and down like this and lifting up fully. If you have a thicker paint, you can almost see when you need to lift it up and move it away. Now I'm at my 6 o'clock, straight back down, straight up. I hope that is making sense. Now I would go around and I would do the same thing. In those openings right there, doing the exact same thing. Loading it up. Straight up. If you start to see that your dot is not looking as uniform as the last ones, it's time to clean off your dotter. Just grab your damp rag and wipe it off again and start with a clean tool. Sometimes the paint will get clumpy on there and it's going to change how uniform your dots are. Come right down, lift up, just like that. And then we'll finish off this circle. And there you go. That is how almost every mandala begins, okay? Now what you can do from this point, that's where you can either follow different patterns or just let your imagination take you. You can either go right on top of those dots to create another row with a larger size dotter, with the same size. You can come back in between here and do teeny tiny dots with the other end of the dotter. See how there's a tinier dot? You could go right in between those with a smaller one. Actually, I can show you how that would look. We'll take a small one, loading it up with about that amount of paint. Don't push all the way down because then you're gonna merge it right in between. This is kind of a scarier thing to do for beginners because it's easier to get that merge of the dotting that you don't want, but it ends up looking really cool when you get all of them in there, when you size down like that in between. You just have to really remember to think about what I was saying before with you're letting the paint touch the surface, but you're not letting the dotting tool touch the surface. Because this is on paper, it probably will merge a little bit more. But it kind of, it gives it a neat little pattern when you have that little one in between there. See that? Like I said, that's a little scarier one. You don't have to do that. You can do it any way you want, really, but you can do it more like this one, which is they're just uniform all the way around. And the reason these are smaller, it's just because I used a smaller dotting tool than I did right now. If I use a smaller dotting tool, you're going to have more of the dots. Use a larger one, you'll have fewer of the dots. So next technique, once you're going out from here, like I said, you can either go right out on top, above, centering it right where it is at the 12 o'clocks and 6 o'clocks, or you can dot in the center. This is very common when you're wanting to create a pattern that looks like a swirl. Let me see if I can give you an example of that. If you're going to do a swirl pattern, you're going to dot in between those bigger dots. But you're still going to follow that 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock rule. See, there are the two big dots, right? I have the same size tool that I just used for those bigger ones. I'm loading it up and I'm creating my 12 o'clock right in between those. So it's right above that smaller dot. You see that right there? So there's my 12 o'clock. There's my 6 o'clock. $12 o'clock. $6 o'clock. That one's a little bit further away. That's okay. Go with it. 12 o'clock. $6 o'clock. And then one more. $12 o'clock. 6 o'clock. So you can see it's starting to form the design. The real magic comes in when you do top dotting. That's a really cool effect that you give, because you can give the effect of a centered top dot, or you can give the effect of an off-centered top dot where it makes it look more like petals. That's how this one has that cool effect that it does. That's all because of the top dots. As you can see, the top dots are a little bit smaller than the one right underneath them, and they're down toward the bottom of the dot. And as you do that, it creates this really cool, almost like fish scales or petals, or however you want to look at it. Creates that cool effect. So the magic really comes in when you do top dotting. But you got to start with the basics first. All the basics here, you can see how this is very similar to this, aside from the fact that I demonstrated those smaller dots. It all starts with these basics. You see that? Another technique on here that I'm going to show you on paper before I go to the rock is the walking dots. What it means to have a walking dot is you have your loaded tool and your dots are going to gradually get smaller without you even having to reload with paint. Let me show you what I mean. So I come down, I do one dot, and that's what it looks like. Come down right below it, I do another dot. It's magically a little bit smaller, but still uniform. Come down below it, a little bit smaller, still uniform dot. Can you see that? I hope so. Walking dots. Aren't those cool? I love those. I use them on this one in the reverse right there. I use them on this one right there. I use them for my Dragonfly, which is, oh, here's my Dragonfly. A lot of you like this Dragonfly. The whole body of the Dragonfly is walking dots. Do you see that? Same thing. Just wings, outline with the small dots, walking dots. So it's a lot simpler than it might look. So I love walking dots. The other cool thing that you do with walking dots is you create these lacy effects. So let's say I wanted to do, let me see, I'm going to demonstrate a larger one here so I can do the lacy effect and you can see it. We'll just do this. I took a larger tool so that I have a larger dot to demonstrate that for you. I'm coming right down. This is that in-between technique. Remember, in between? It's right in between those two. See, load up the tool. Right in between. Load up the tool. At this point, I'm not doing my 6 and 12 because my spacing's already defined by those dots right there. Okay, loading up the tool. Coming right down. See that? All right, I'm going to clean this off. I don't need to go all the way around because all I'm doing right now is I'm going to demonstrate to you what that lacy look can be just using the walking dot technique. You know how I showed you how you do that in a straight line? You can also do it in a curved line. And to get that lacy effect, you curve it. You curve it around that dot. So in this case, the example rock, it's curved around this dot. See, walking dots are just curved right there, the red and the pink. So the way you would do that, you load up your tool. Again, that's about how much you want. Come down, do your dot right above there, your smaller, okay? When I first started doing this, I started walking right from that one. I then saw a tip and it made so much more sense. I was struggling with this because I didn't have consistency in my sides right next to that top one. So I saw a tip where you do that top one, then you reload. Don't try to do it just from that one load. Now you start your walking and you just curve it like this around your dot. Like that. You can go all in this direction if you want. If you do that and you don't do it around the full dot, you will end up with this kind of effect. You see that? How it only goes halfway around? But if you do it all the way around, you'll end up with that effect. So now let's just finish it off, going around that way. Right next to it and a little bit lower. Right below it. And just kind of keep an eye on where your ones were across the way and see if you can keep them as close to it as possible. And there you go. Then after you do all of them, you can either size up with your tool and do another row of them, or you can use the same size dotting tool and come right back around. Like that, depending on how much space you have in between your dots. And don't worry about it. Like if you get to the end and you're creating your own pattern and you're seeing that it's too close, that you're not going to be able to do the same thing on the dot right next to it, just skip the one, do an every other. So like we could do this. So that every other one around it would have that. And then if you didn't think that looked finished enough and you wanted something else, okay, let's think of something else. Let's do a walking dot straight line on the in-betweens, right? So it could end up being a design like that. You could do it however you want. That's why I don't like to use patterns as much for mandalas. There are a lot of mandala patterns and stencils out there. I thought I would enjoy those. I thought I would get a lot of ideas for them. So I bought a package of them. See how that would end up looking if it were complete? Kind of similar to this. See, I went every other on this one. Anyway, I thought I would like those patterns and stencils. They're not helpful to me. I know there are some people who swear by them. I'm not really comfortable with them. I prefer just kind of winging it on my own. You can use them. I like looking at different mandala pictures of people's incredible artwork and then kind of just doing mine off of that, or creating something that just pops out of my brain. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I finish one and I'm like, that's not that great. But then I remind myself I'm my own worst critic, right? We all say that. I've put out ones, I've hid ones that I thought were not my greatest and I didn't really like them. And then somebody posts it and tells me how beautiful it is. So, you know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? I'm going to critique it and think, oh, I don't like it. But guarantee you, you do one, you may think it's awful. It is going to make somebody smile. And that's the point of all this. We're doing kindness rocks. We're enjoying it. We're learning stuff from one another. But the main point is we're making pieces of art that other people are loving and smiling from. And that just makes it all worthwhile. So even something that you might not think is good enough, it is, and go with it and enjoy it. All right, so those are some of the basics. The top dotting, I think I will demonstrate in another tutorial. I've already been talking for half an hour. So what I'm going to do, which I didn't realize it went so quickly, is I will start on a rock so you can see where we're going on this. I probably won't talk that much while I'm doing it, but these are the basic techniques I'm going to do, and you'll see how it is. And why don't you guys start on one? I'll do this. You guys, after this first tutorial is done, if you want to, start on one and then bring it back up. Stop at the stopping point that I stop at. And then when I do my next tutorial, have it handy. And maybe we can do the next one walking through it together. We'll see how this works out. I'm hoping this is helping you guys. I really don't know yet, but we'll see. Okay, so you can. I'm just doing this background in white because as you can see, the top dots is really what makes everything pop. We can pick a color, you can pick your own color, but I'm going to do my first round of dots with just a white background. As you can see on this one, I did light pink for my background, but this time I'm going to do white because I think it'll be easier to see. I'm doing it on my black chalk paint base coated rock. You can measure your rock if you feel more comfortable with that. I just tend to eyeball it. Like I kind of hold my dotting tool, what looks like halfway that way, and then what looks like halfway that way, and I decide that's where my dot's going to be. Do it however you want to do it. You can measure it. If you're going to be doing that, I suggest using a white charcoal pencil to put where that dot is going to be, that center. White charcoal pencils are your friend on these. It is unbelievable. A damp cloth, that'll wipe right off. Look at this. And you don't even know it's there. Let's say you messed up. You put it in the wrong spot. That will dry. You won't even know it was there. Good thing I had another handy. This one's a little lumpier, a little rounder at least, but that'll work. So we're gonna say center is right about there. I'm going to use this size tool, loading it up about that much, not so drippy that it comes off, but not so little that you can see your dotting tool through it. You don't want to see any surface of that dotting tool. Coming right down in what I hope is the center. See, and it created that little bloop. That's why you never want a top dot on that. It would be ruined on a wet dot. Wipe off that tool. Okay, then our next size, that's a pretty big dot. So I'm not going to use a super small. I think that one will be a good size. Let's see. If it's not, I can always size up, but I think it's going to be good. See how loaded that is with the paint? Okay, 12 o'clock, coming down. Six o'clock, which became 12 o'clock when I turned the rock. Okay, I loaded that with a little too much paint. I'm going to take off and start that over just so I don't ruin my sizing. I reloaded it. Okay, turn it, reload. Turn it, reload. By reminding yourself to not touch the rock with the dotting tool, you'll have a lot more control on the size of your dot, because you can see as you're coming down how big that dot is getting. If you go all the way down on your rock, that dot's going to be bigger than your last one. So that's a really important thing to remind yourself of when you're dotting. Do not come all the way down with that tool to the point where you're feeling it touch the rock. You'll know what I mean once you try it. It's kind of hard to describe, but just let that paint create the size and your pressure. I highly recommend practicing it on paper first so you can get that feel of what it is to come down but not jab it down to the point where it's touching. Okay, I like the spacing of that one. It is a little different from this one. I did smaller ones on that one, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. Now we're gonna go the next round, okay? And I think we're gonna go the next round in between. I'm gonna keep it basic. I'm not gonna do those little ones in the middle that I did on this one, because I don't want you guys to have problems with the bleeding yet. I want you to feel comfortable with this first. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to now center our 12 o'clock between those two dots, remember? So I loaded my tool and I'm coming above I'm giving myself enough room so that when I come down, it's not going to bleed into the other one. Like that. You're kind of forming a little triangle there. Okay? And I'm going to turn it. I'm going to do the same thing on that side. Turn it. Creating my 12 o'clock again. Turn it. $12 again. Turn it. Kind of see the pattern that it's creating. See that? It's going in between all of those. Maybe if I hold it up, you can... Does that help? So I've been talking so much. I know that was a lot of basics to give it first, but this is how we're getting started, okay? The next time, we'll size up. We'll size up from that one to a little bit bigger, and we'll go in between those. And we'll continue until we get about to... Actually, maybe I should just do that right now. Size up, we've got this size. Let's see. Next size up, I think, would be about that one, if you can see. See, that's about how loaded it is. About like that. I'm balancing my pinky on the rock. Keeps my hand steady. See, I pull that straight up. If I had gone to the side, there was a little string of paint that would have made a mess. Reload. There's my load. Straight up. Straight up. Okay, there, that's how it's looking right now. You see that? And I would just keep that going out like it is. Now I'm going to size up one more with this one. It's actually two. I skipped one of the punch sizes, just so we can reach that outer one a little bit faster. Load it up. Oh, I didn't do my 12 o'clock. There's my 12 o'clock. Once you get used to it, you don't necessarily feel like you have to follow your 12 and 6. You can just go around in order, because you've got your spacing pretty well defined at that point. But until you're comfortable with it, I suggest sticking with the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock thing, because that really helps keep it uniform. in your spacing. Straight up. Straight up. Straight up. I kind of talk to myself and remind myself as I'm doing it, straight up, so I probably sound like a lunatic, but that's okay. So that's where we're looking at right now. Okay? And we can size up bigger again. I'm going to skip again in my transfer punch set. I'm going to skip the next size and jump it back up so that we get it out there, because the bigger the dots, obviously, the less dots you're using, so the faster you're going to get out to your edge, right? Okay, so right in between 12 o'clock. I think I will stop at this next completed one because I probably have used enough of your time, probably going on about an hour. I'm sorry about that. Once I got talking and explaining stuff, I kind of lost track of the time. But I'm going to wipe that off, close up my pot of paint, and show you where we're at. So that's where we are right now. The next tutorial, what we'll do is we'll do these center dots right around there. We'll do that walking dot border around them. The walking dot straight line centers, and we'll do our top dotting. Okay? So that's already pretty quick progress. It wasn't really that bad. Going with the larger sizes, you can actually get through a mandala a lot quicker. As you get better and more comfortable with it, you can size your dots down and get into your more detailed spacing. Like this one had a lot of tiny dot details, but I'll be happy to do more of those with you too after this one if you enjoy this. And sometimes practicing on these, you can even do half circle practices, but you know, practicing on the paper is really, really helpful. It gets you used to your spacing. It gets you used to your shapes. And maybe a third tutorial, I'll show you the comma shape that you can make, which is like a little eyebrow above some of the dots. That's another technique. And then let me know if there's other stuff you want me to cover in another one. But why don't we leave it at that for this one? I'll sign off, and I hope this helps. I hope you go ahead and get to this stage on one of your own. Let me know if there are any problems that you had or questions that you have while you're doing that. And then on the next tutorial, maybe I can address them for you. But this is kind of the design we'll end up with if you start with this. Take care, guys. Signing off.